Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining for our webinar, Which AppSec Testing Tool is Right for You? I'm Khaled, and I will be your host for the day. Our speaker for the day are Tim Chase, Director of Field Security at Colibra, and David Kosorok, Senior Director, Application and Product Security at DocuSign. Please note that the session will be in listen-only mode and will last for about 40 minutes, out of which last 10 minutes will be dedicated to Q&A, requesting all the participants to post your questions in the Q&A window. Should you need any assistance during the session, please use the chat box or the Q&A box. Also, we do have two criteria for certification. First, attend the complete webinar to become eligible. And second, fill in the survey, which will and give the right answers to all the three questions based on the webinar, which will be sent to you post the webinar. About our speakers, Team Chase has been working in information security industry for 15 years, leading the security team focusing on cloud and AppSec, and overseeing security for leading healthcare training company. Over the last few years, he has been focusing his efforts on DevSecOps and intersection of AppSec, DevOps, and cloud. He has presented at multiple conferences on this topic, including RSA and ISSA InfoSec. He is a LinkedIn training author where he has been training to help build DevSecOps in the development pipeline. David Kosorok is responsible for DocuSign's application and product security testing program. David has over 25 years of experience in software testing and security testing, and over 12 years of experience working specifically in security. Prior to joining DocuSign, David pioneered application security programs for Align Technologies, SAP Concur, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and few startup companies. David holds a number of professional security certificates, including CISSP, CSSLP, GWAPT, CHFI, and CEH, as well as Masters of Science in Information Security and Assurance. He has also been a volunteer beta editor for PenTest magazine for a number of years, and recently joined EC Council's Global Advisory Board for CASE, Certified Application Security Engineer. I would now like to hand over the session. Over to you, Team and David.
Awesome. Thank you. So Tim and I are going to kind of review at a high level. We're going to talk about first of all, how you have to understand what you're dealing with. You know, there is not a cookie cutter answer to the question of what application security tools do I use. You need to understand your environment, create a strategy that supports that environment, and then develop processes and tools that additionally support that. And then we'll have some Q&A, of course, and we hope that you ask us lots of questions. Neither Tim nor I need to be agreed with all the time. So we hope that we have different opinions that we can talk about this. That's how we all kind of learn and grow.
And so the first thing I always talk about when I start with the conversation of building out an AppSec program or understanding which tools you need in your arsenal from an application security program is I think it's best to understand your environment. And what I mean by that is don't try and take one tool set that you have and that you've used before in a previous place. Understand what is currently used in your current environment. And the rationale behind that is you're going to be more successful if you integrate with what's already there rather than try and force an entirely new process. And so some of the things that I really look at is one of them, these are just a few examples, but one of them is the languages. So which languages do you currently use at your company? Do you use one language? Do you use many languages? Are they some of the older ones like C, or are they some of the newer ones, you know, like some of the new JavaScript languages? And that matters because that will drive which tool sets will work, right? So when you're at a SaaS company that maybe develops one product and you push it out, then you may only have one language that you have to support. But if you're at an enterprise bank or something similar to that that has been developing software for 20 years, you may have to support a process that has half a dozen languages, right, from various mergers and acquisitions, or just over time you're supporting a lot more products, right? So it's important to ask which languages are you going to have to support, and how many, right? And the next thing that that I always ask is, what is your development process? Agile, waterfall, hybrid, something in the middle, and that really matters because different tools integrate in different ways. If you try and take a code analyzer tool and put it into an agile type of process where you're doing builds every day or what have you, that's going to be a harder uplift, right? So understanding, how are you going to integrate? What sort of processes do you guys have? That to me is always a good place to start. And then finally, a team structure. Are you guys looking to do a DevOps sort of team structure, or are you going to be a traditional team where you've got dedicated testers, dedicated infrastructure, dedicated developers? And that's important because it really helps you build your process, which your tools will be a part of, to understand your different integration points. And it will also help you understand where security needs to be involved. Is security going to be the ones running the tests in a traditional sort of waterfall way, or in more of a DevOps way? Will the security team be empowering the DevOps team to run the tests themselves, right? And so that one is an important one to get right as well. And we'll look at an example of how that might work a little bit later.
So Tim, I had a question for you.
Sure.
When you're working as a security team, trying to find ways to influence the development team to kind of adopt and drive security within the teams, what have you found to be the most successful way to do that? Whether you're integrating directly with the team or whether you're creating a security champions program, what have you personally found to be most successful?
The way that I have found to be more successful is to involve them from the start, right? So don't do anything in isolation. So as a security team practitioner, don't go out there, search for a tool, and then go to the development team and say, this is the tool that you're going to use.
Right.
I tend to find success when you involve them in the process. And I say, look, we have to do security testing of our product. Nobody's going to argue about that. The development team is not going to say, no, we don't. That's silly, right? But if you make it easy for them, if they're developing in, let's say, Eclipse, that's their development environment of choice, then that should be one of your requirements is, okay, when I'm looking for a new tool, how my tool needs to integrate with Eclipse, or, we do our builds in Jenkins, okay? So let's find a security tool that integrates with Jenkins, right? So make sure that you don't add a lot more work and process to what they're already doing, right? Especially as you get into some of these DevOps and Agile processes where time is money and time is releases. Find ways to still get done what we need to get done, but integrate with what they're already doing and make it easy for them and make them a stakeholder in the process. That's my 2 cents. I don't know if you found anything different.
No, I totally agree. In fact, I think gone are the days when security was in kind of their own little closet and they'd find stuff and throw it over the wall and expect developers to fix it by a certain SLA or doom would befall the company. I think now we have to. Modern security is all about creating partnerships with our development teams and integrating more closely with them, not separating ourselves from them, but involving them. Exactly like you're saying, if it's self-service tooling, because that supports the environment, then that's what we do, and we find out ways to make that work. I totally agree with you on that.
I used to throw PDFs over the wall. That's kind of the joke that I always say, when I'm doing the training is, don't throw PDFs over the wall anymore. Don't run the scan and throw them a PDF and say, come back and fix everything that the report says is critical, right? It's a matter of, all right, we're going to throw this into Jira so that or Slack or whatever, right?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Okay, so in supporting what Tim just talked about, the next phase, once you understand what you're dealing with, and once you started to develop that partnership, you do want to create a strategy that you can then work with the development teams to implement. I think both Tim and I recommend not reinventing the wheel. This is important, using tried and true strategies like prevent, detect, and response type of strategies where you can categorize your security programs by where you are in that software development lifecycle. Prevention is all about education, developing those relationships, creating security champion programs, conducting threat modeling reviews before code is even written. Detection, again, reiterating what Tim said, understanding your environment so you can detect those security vulnerabilities once they're in the code, and you can give as quick a feedback as possible. If you can detect security vulnerabilities as the developers submitting their code and you can give them immediate response, then learning happens faster and you reduce risk because you stop it from going into the main build potentially. Additionally to that, when you understand your environment and you have this strategy framework, you can also then begin to say, okay, we don't want to overwhelm our partners in development, so we're going to prioritize the security programs that we implement. And so then you begin to create a process where you implement and kind of ratchet up your security over a period of time. It's not something that you come and slap them in the face with immediately. As part of that process of strategically implementing security programs, at the same time, you want to show that value by showing metrics. The metrics are used for a couple reasons, I think. Metrics, of course, help people understand that what they're doing is making a difference, that they can see the value. Obviously, you need metrics so you can report that to compliance and other areas. Metrics can be used to drive priority as well. If you're going to leadership and development and you're showing the metrics and saying, hey, this is where we are and this is where we need to be, it helps them prioritize resources so that more attention can be paid appropriately to security, and they can help balance out that risk and understand that. Metrics are also used so that both developers and security team members can hold themselves accountable. And what I mean by that is, if we say that we need to be FedRAMP compliant and we need to have meet SLAs of 30, 90, and 180 days for critical, high, medium, and low risk security issues, then I need to be able to share with the development teams how they're doing, where that line is and how they're doing and how they can meet that. Then we can have discussions about prioritizing the vulnerabilities instead of just, like I said, the old days before, where you just throw them the whole mess at once and they're like, I don't even know what to do with this. Where do I start? So this helps give direction and really focuses that priority level on where we need to put our most effort in.
One question that I had that I always kind of get asked is, how do you prioritize your security program? So what's the best way that you have found to be able to do that, or which one should get the higher priority?
Awesome question. From my perspective, again, you have to know your environment, and the environment includes the people that you work with in development. And so if I know that that team is going to react quickly to requests from source code scannings from static analysis, then I may look for tools that implement into GitHub directly. If I'm using, my team's using GitHub, for example, and they submit code and they immediately get feedback on that and say, oh, you accidentally tried to check in a secret here. I know that team is going to react faster. If the team is more dispersed and maybe the code is they do most of their testing at a different level, maybe I say, hey, let's pull in interactive application security testing. Maybe that has a higher priority because that allows us to get more feedback from QA and other dynamic testers that come in and give us that feedback even before production still. So it just really depends on the balance of where those efforts are initially put.
Okay, cool.
This is just a visual of what Tim and I were just talking about, where an example of a strategy, and again, these bullet points are just samples. The idea again is you find ways to tie in, and each of you will need to understand what is the software development lifecycle of your team. Where do you have that biggest bang for the buck? Now, this does not mean that you can start off with a strategy and only do prevention and then only do detection. This implies that you do prevention, detection, and response at the same time, but you may start with one or two of the security programs. Each of these bullet points is a security program. As you develop this out and create something that has meaning to the team and gives them feedback, you'll see that as you mature, you can handle more and more security programs. And that's part of that long-term strategy of filling in the gaps, finding the high-risk areas, starting with those, and filling in the gaps as you move along and as the teams understand and get used to working with you. Now, can we take questions as we go along, or do you want us to take questions only after we're done with the presentation? I'm just asking the supporters here of the program if they want to.
I think David, after the presentation, we can take it up if you don't mind.
No, that's fine. I just don't want to have anybody forget a question if they have something that pops in their mind, because this is something where we want to have a conversation with people.
Definitely. So we'll take it at the end, and I'll read it out so that we don't miss out anything.
Perfect. Perfect. So anyway, this is just one way of displaying that overall strategy. There's lots of ways of implementing this and making this part of what your company does. But we mentioned a couple things before. One of them is metrics. Each one of these, you need to find a way to show the metrics and how you're trying to meet a particular goal. So you don't implement a security program just because you heard that every company in the world does it. You do it because you want to reduce a level of risk, or you're covering a certain risk gap that you're concerned with. That's part of, again, coming back to knowing your environment. Tim, any comments on that?
Yeah, I was going to say, I actually love this diagram, and I think this is something that I know that you created and that I would use going forward, because I think that in order to be successful, truly, you have to have each of these, right? So each of these three pillars are so important to kind of have the overall SDLC support. You may be able to start with some of the detect, right? I mean, I think when you look at it, most people tend to start there. They start with their static analysis, and they start with their open source or something like that, right? But ultimately, when it comes time to go to that next step, they don't always know where to go. And I think this kind of helps them, right? Because they take a step back and they say, okay, in order to grow my process, I need to prevent it so that my detect is easier and shows less stuff. And that's where the policies and the threat modeling and the training all come in, right? And so that's why you see a lot of these security training companies really coming up and being more popular. And then also, some of the response stuff, that's also important. And I think we did last year I did another EC Council webinar about pen testing and the reporting around it, right? And it's super important as well, because it helps pick up maybe some of the things that detect didn't. And so I think that I like how this this pillar shows kind of ultimately you can start with one thing, maybe detect, but you have to grow it into this entire thing to be able to support your SDLC.
Yeah, and I'm going to go back to one of your previous comments, Tim, also when you're emphasizing understanding your environment. That is something that's so key here. And one of the security programs from this, and I'm calling the bullet points security programs, is developing a security champions program. That's something that, each of these, we should have entitled this tools and processes that you need to have for AppSec. It's not just a tool, it's a process. It's a organizational relationship. If you don't have a security champion program, and a security champion program is where you have key individuals from each of your development teams that create a relationship with you, that they kind of liaise with you back and forth, so that you can come to them and say, hey, would you help me review this static analysis report so we can get rid of false positives, we can clean this up, help me understand how we can prioritize these particular critical issues we found so that your team can fix these faster. Developing those relationships will help you deeper understand the changes that will be occurring with your environment as you move down the road and as you mature. So, you know, while I didn't perfectly prioritize these bullet points in each of these categories, security champions on the prevention side is one of the very most important processes, because it creates that, again, that partnership rather than creating that wall. It breaks down walls and builds partnerships, and that's really important for security to progress faster.
I think it helps you scale too. I think that, you know, that's one of the things we always hear about, you know, resource shortages in the security industry, and you know, you can't always put a security person on every single agile team in your company, right? That would be difficult. So I think having security champions helps us scale a little bit, so that we're not in 50 places at once, right? We can depend on our champions to do some of the stuff while we, you know, stay up here a little bit more.
Test, test, 1, 2. Can you hear me?
I can now. I'm not sure what happened.
Yeah, I have to apologize to the audience. So we've had snowstorms that apparently internet drops randomly. Normally I have a gig line, and that line apparently is not quite good enough. So I apologize for that. Okay, can we see the screen? Everything is still visible?
It is for me, but are we?
Yes, David, it's visible.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
All right, so I guess this is me. So one of the things that we talked about is actually creating the process, right? So we've kind of talked about this quite a little bit already, but one of the, just to kind of state it in a bullet point, like integrating with the existing development processes is key. No matter, so when you're trying to choose your appropriate tool, the first thing you have to do is understand the development process, right? So that you can integrate with it, and that includes team structure and tool integration. So whether you're one big team or whether you're a DevOps team of 5, right? Understanding that is key. Tool integration is the second thing, right? Make it easy for your developers to do the job. So if they work in Jira and Slack all day, then you know that those seem like 2 really good integration points for your security tool. So draw out kind of how they work, and then how to get your security tooling in there. And then the next part of the process is to make as hands-off as possible, right? So digital transformation and DevOps are just 2 big things in the industry today, right? I know that sometimes they can be buzzwords, but they're buzzwords because that's what people are wanting to do, right? And the key to that, when you look at the underlying reason why they're doing it, is because they want to be faster, right? We're not in the, you know, 20 years ago when I first started doing testing, you know, we were on like quarterly releases of our product, right? That doesn't exist anymore, right? We're talking about monthly at most, or every other week, or continuous, right? So making it as hands-off as possible is gonna enable this. And if you don't do this, it will ultimately come back and bite you, because nothing will make the security team have a bad name quicker than you being the long pole in the tent, so to speak, right? You don't want to be the thing that holds up a build, or it takes you an entire sprint to do your testing, so you're always behind, right? That is not where you want to be. And so one of the ways that you can do that is by making your process as hands-off as possible, and having your documentation super clear on how to do it. Make it seamless. make it documented so that it rolls just like everything else. And then create a feedback loop. Don't be afraid to say something doesn't work, right? So if the process that you rolled out doesn't work for some reason, just revisit it and decide what doesn't work. If you don't like your defects going to Slack because you don't find that they have enough visibility or they're worked enough, then just rethink where they're going. You know, don't be afraid to go back and say, hey, we're getting too many false positives. Why is that? Oh, well, let's go back and revisit. Maybe we need to build some new rules in our tool, right? Always be looking to see what works and what doesn't as a part of your process.
Yeah, I love that. I completely agree with that. And you know, when you create integration with those teams, again, it brings your teams closer together. And this is also where that security champion can come in and help with you and kind of confirm that, oh yeah, that's the right space to live in for this tool. And you know, I remember when we were implementing one of the application security teams with a new company, and in my thought process, I thought, okay, we're going to get SAST going immediately. We got to start analyzing the source code. But we took a step back and realized that the highest area that these developers were working in would be more amenable to interactive application security testing, and that's where we would get more source code coverage, and where we get more, and all of that. We found a way to do it without the developers having to do anything except their regular job, and all of a sudden we were able to see that their regular job was producing source code coverage. And they were helping the software testers, and software testers could see that they were testing. You know, you see that integration of ideas came together and really brought the teams closer together, and we got more testing done.
Yeah, I agree. I love that. You know, like you said, the key there is, you know, the developers almost see the security defects in the same place. Maybe they see their unit test defects, right? Everything is in one place where they don't have to go to 2 or 3 different places, right?
Yeah. Awesome.
And this is a simplistic diagram that I use quite a bit, right? That talks about kind of that feedback loop, right? So you have your developer, and this is using IaaS. So this is an interactive security testing method, which is slightly different than SAST, right? It works at the runtime level. And so as your developers check code in and as the builds are happening, the application server is being exercised, right? So typically when you do your builds and you run your unit tests, everything is running automatically in the background. And while all of that is running, your interactive application security testing is happening on the back end, right? And it is doing security testing while your application is doing the unit testing. It happens at the same time, right? And so all of that is happening in the background. And then when your IaaS server finds something, when a security bug is identified while it's running those tests, it immediately sends it to something, right? I have Slack and Jira here for just examples to post those defects, right? So this is instantaneous. This isn't something that takes a day. You know, as your unit tests are running, this is just almost like another version of that, right? And the application security is being done automatically and then being posted. And then I mentioned here, you know, go back to everything goes back to the developer, right? So you have that loop that goes back to them just like everything else. And so that's just kind of a visual to describe what we've already talked about.
Yeah, and it's what's kind of funny. This, well, you know, Tim, when you and I were preparing for this, I know we had a discussion on we could probably just have a discussion for an hour on interactive application security testing, how you implement that, you know, because it's so valuable for not only the security vulnerabilities that you find, but because of that instantaneous feedback loop, it again draws your partnerships closer together and helps you kind of be more aligned. So there's a lot of really great benefits for this feedback loop concept.
Agreed, absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about kind of preparing the strategy and the plan and creating the processes to support the tools. Now it's time to kind of think about taking a step back and, you know, think about those 3 pillars that we were just talking about. Each of those contained a set of security programs. And what is really fascinating is that they're probably, just like you can do 1,000 hello worlds in any given language, there's 1,000 ways to implement this, okay, and infinite ways, really.
Mhm.
So you're thinking of dynamic or static or interactive application security testing tools. Those are kind of your pillars in, and we talked about this earlier, in your process for scanning and for helping developers get that feedback after they're writing code. But think about this: you want to spread across those pillars of prevention, detection, and response in a logical way that really helps give your team the largest value. Let me talk about a couple things, and Tim, feel free to jump in anytime. I just want to talk about a couple of these security programs that I think are important. I mentioned before security champions on the prevention side, and we've talked a little bit about IAST on the detection side. Every company is going to be a little different, but I think I'm seeing a trend that we're moving towards cloud-based tools, and that is where I don't want my security team spending their time supporting tools on-prem or focusing on updating the tool. I want to just focus on the service that provides, and then the findings that come out of that. I want to focus on the remediation of those issues and developing that relationship again with the development teams. I don't want to focus on the tool itself because it's super cool or we got a good deal on it. But you need to find things that allow you to leverage. Tim mentioned this earlier. You need to find ways to scale up with that. If our company is growing 100% every year over year, I'm not going to get headcount. I'm not going to double my team every year. That's not going to happen.
You can find them.
Yeah. Well, that's another problem entirely.
Mhm.
And so I think the big issue here is how do we leverage and become scalable? And that's where you look at these tools and talk about programs that are invaluable, bug bounty programs, where HackerOne, BugCrowd, Cobalt.io, a lot of companies out there are producing ways to help you as a company, whether you're a small mom and pop shop or a large $1 to $5 to $50 billion a year company. Bug bounty programs allow you to scale very quickly. Other programs, of course, we mentioned security champions, red teams. You can have internal pen testing teams that kind of coalesce and work with red teams. There's a lot of other services that you can make a part of what you're doing. But again, when you're creating the strategy, think about, I would just sit down with your team and maybe pull your developers in and write down your list, categorize them by prevention, detection, and response, and then prioritize them, figure out which ones you feel are going to give you the biggest bang for the buck up front, and go with those first. Every company is going to be different.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to start, right? Like we mentioned, everybody seems to start with detect, and then that's kind of where they get stuck sometimes. Like what, we don't know what to do next. I've been a part of several different panels or whatever, and they're like, okay, we've got static in place, and they're like, now what? We're good, right? But it's like, no, like you got to take it to the next level, right? Like the security champions is just something I'm a huge fan of, and I can't talk enough about it. And then the bug bounty is kind of the new thing. I think that's really cool as well. That provides some good value, right? And that's usually one of the things I think that comes. It's definitely invaluable for like SaaS companies and things like that. And it typically comes a little bit later in your journey, right, where you're kind of decide, really still enhancing it. But I love the idea of coming up with a plan of this is what we're going to do this year. Typically when I start, like, you can't do everything at once, right? It would be impossible. And so coming up with a plan of what you're going to do this year, next year, and the year after that, I think, trying to your best to come up with like a 3-year plan of how you want to do it, it will help you also when you're doing your planning yearly to obviously hire new people, but just in general to show this is what we have from an AppSec plan. When at my previous job, when I ran security for a SaaS training company, that's what I used to present to the board, right? So when we went to the audit committee, I would show them, they wanted to see the results of our annual pen tests and all that kind of stuff. But I think the more valuable thing were the metrics and kind of the overall plan. Like, here's here's where we're at from a security testing point of view. Here's where we're going to be at in the next year, right? And just show that how we're making that growth. And I think that just sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming when you start, but just putting pen to paper and just planning it out, I think, and then executing to that plan is, I think, the best thing that you can do.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Yeah, in fact, that in my opinion is probably the best thing. If you get anything out of this discussion that Tim and I are having, is to create a strategic plan, that 1 to 3 year plan where you implement that and then track where you are and revisit every year. Are you bringing on board the right security programs at the right time? What's next? What's coming up next year? What do you need to start preparing for and thinking about? And then just kind of track and present to your team and to your, obviously to your boss, on where you're tracking and where you're going to be. So creating that vision oftentimes is inspiring as well and creates even stronger partnerships.
And don't be afraid to say that we didn't get 100%. It goes back to, what we said a couple of slides ago. Like, if you missed something, if something didn't quite work out, like, just revisit why it didn't work out and alter, make some adjustments to your plan. And don't be afraid. I don't want to say don't be afraid to fail, but like, just, be able to be agile, be able to adjust, right?
Yeah, love it. Well, that went pretty quick.
It did. Time has come to an end. Time for questions now.
Thank you so much, Tim and David. I think I found it very informative, and audience also aligns with it because we have so many questions lined up. But before we go ahead, I'm just going to release a poll and would want our audience to just have a look at it and please cast your poll vote. So let's go back to the questions. Okay, what is the best tool which has good coverage for DAST, SAST in DevSecOps environment?
Say that question again. I'm sorry.
Okay, what is the best tool which has the good coverage for DAST and SAST in DevSecOps environment?
We probably both have opinions on that one. They're going to be two separate tools, right? I don't know of any tool that it does both. From a you don't have to get too complicated. I don't think let's talk about DAST first, and I don't think you have to get too complicated when it comes to DAST. I think it's hard to beat something like a burp. That's kind of a tried and true thing. It can be run via API. You could do something like an Acunetics, that's a little bit more to it, has a GUI, something along those lines. From a SaaS perspective, it gets a little bit tough. I'll tell you, one of my favorites is Checkmarx. I feel like they have pretty good coverage of applications or languages. They've got about as good of a ability to do automation and things as a SaaS tool can, but also Checkmarx has made the foray into IAST as well. So one of the things that I would challenge as a part of the question is what I typically see is I don't have as much of a need for SAST anymore. So I would ask, do you really need SAST? Are you scanning some languages that's not covered by IAST? If your languages can be covered by IAST, like a typical Java, .NET, things like that, like I would do that in dynamic as opposed to a SAST in dynamic. But David, I don't know if you have.
I actually completely agree with you on that. If I had a choice, if I was looking at SAST, DAST, and IAST, and I could only choose one of those, I would always choose IAST. And there's a reason. Even though you may not be scanning the code as absolutely as soon as the developer is writing it, it's very close thereafter, because you can have IaaS in their dev environment, so they can write code, submit it and build on their box, and you can have IaaS already there before it goes to the main build. So IaaS can be very early up front. Another thing it does that I really love that I talked about before is that code coverage. How much of your product are you testing? With your unit tests, QA can be involved. You're able to involve so many more engineers in getting eyes on and fingers onto the source code and what's going on there. The benefit is massive, I think. So I'm a huge fan in introducing IaaS, and I agree about Burp Suite Pro. I'm a huge fan, though, depending on your budget. It's always budget conscious, but I like having cloud services do a lot of my work. You know, I use Rapid7 DAST so that, you know, we can point to our test environments, stage environments from external and beat them up that way. I don't have to worry about the environment. I like managed programs. They're a little bit more expensive, but the amount of work that they do to reduce that false positives is worth a couple headcount for me. And that means my team can get so much more work done, and the leverage there is incredible. So while I do agree with you, again, I'm a fan of check marks. I like check marks. I love that they're bringing IaaS into it. But again, IaaS and then DAST would be my secondary if I could get more on that. And
gotta throw out, if we're going to talk about IaaS, gotta throw out Contrast a little bit too. They were kind of the pioneering leader there. So if you're willing to forego SaaS and go straight to IaaS, I would definitely give them a look.
Yeah, that's I've worked with them many times. Great company. One of the things I love about them is they listen carefully to your suggestions and implement them into the product, and then share that back with you. Very great two-way communication with Contrast Security. Yep.
Okay, so the next question is from Akash. For choosing security programs, what if we use a risk-based approach where security team and developers both collaborate, sorry.
Well, that's kind of what we've been talking about the whole time, right? I mean, that's where that Security Champions program is all about collaboration. It's not collaboration just with developers. You know, if you're in the application security world, you also have your compliance team, your risk team, the GRC group that you have to be working with. We collaborate with them all the time. They help us understand what are the risk tiers that we have to deal with, what are the highest risks from their auditing perspective that they've found. We can incorporate that into our program, and then also work with developers to help them prioritize what they focus on first as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I agree with that.
Okay, now Eric has a question. How do you respond when a startup says we can't slow down? If have to get to market, we'll add the secure, or we'll add the security later.
I've never heard that before, David. Have you?
Oh, let's see. I don't know what rhyme. I can't even think of something that rhymes. I was gonna be a smarty pants about this and say what rhymes with solar winds, but I won't go there. The reality is that's always the case. That's a discussion you have to have every day, and that's why you want to create that relationship, so that when you then come to them and say, hey, here's some programs we need to implement, they understand that you're coming based on that from a risk-based perspective, not just because you love application security, but because you want to protect the customer. I think we need to be careful about using the FUD principle. That's a very dangerous thing: fear, uncertainty, and doubt. You want to approach it from a logical, strategic program. There are a lot of things you can do, and I agree, don't slow down the development, but there are things you can do to integrate. We just talked about that. Having an IaaS in your product doesn't slow anything down. You don't implement IaaS in your testing where you want to keep 5 nines. And you don't put it in production necessarily, but that is something where it doesn't slow a developer down. They're just doing their normal job every day. We just talked about that earlier. So finding ways to integrate with the existing software development lifecycle, having those tools be a part of that. Now, if they come back and say, hey, we're going so fast, we don't want to fix anything, then you need to probably describe and tell some stories that say, hey, you know what? We don't want to lose 20% of our revenue because you didn't want to take 30 seconds to fix a bug. Mm-hmm. So you have to have a good discussion. Don't be a smarty pants about it, but have a discussion about this.
Yeah, I agree. I think, it's hard to win those arguments with people that have that sort of a mindset, right? Like the people who have a security later sort of mindset, it can be hard to argue with. But I think, one, they may end up finding out the hard way, right? I think nothing kind of creates urgency with security, like a breach, right? And I hate to say that, but they don't look at the news enough to learn, unfortunately. But I think making it easy is the best way to help this, like David said, and we talked about, right? Like making it so that there's no effort on their part will help solve that. Then you have the other side of, if you find security issues, then they have to agree to fix them before production, right? Because there's always the option of, yeah, that's great that we have them, but we're just going to put them in a backlog and we'll get to them in the next sprint or two, right? That is an option. That's where you can depend on your security champion to help you, right? Because I've used security champions before as kind of people to help groom the backlog to make sure that security stuff rises to the top. So that's where those people are going to help. And then, eventually, and this doesn't help you in the short term, but long term, coming up with an agreement with the leadership to at least dedicate a certain amount of the sprint to security issues, right? Like, you can say, I want to make sure that 20% of every sprint is dedicated to a security issue of some type, whether that's security enhancements that we wanted, whether that's fixing the defects, right? And the other thing that will help, I feel, is if they make the effort up front, in the long term, it shouldn't be as big of a deal, right? So when you initially start this process, you could have 50 things you've got to clean up. But 6 months from now, like if you've done that initial thing, like you should have learned, so you're not making SQL injection mistakes over and over, right? And so the amount of things that they have to fix in a build, if you do your process right, shouldn't be very it shouldn't be very much, right? It shouldn't be very intensive because it could just be something silly. It could be a new type of security vulnerability that's being found, right? So if once you get the process ingrained and you have that feedback loop, hopefully that won't be as much of a problem. But there's no easy solution to that one.
As part of what, Tim, what you're saying, I think sometimes there has to be an educational component to where we educate our executive leaders. Sometimes they may be oblivious. They're so focused on the dollar that they forget that there is, or the profit, they forget that there is a responsibility to protect our customers. So sometimes you may have to take a critical issue and run and do a 2-minute video on, hey, here's what bad guys can do. Here's how you get shell in the box in our systems right now, and actually run them through that system and say, folks, this is why we have security. And it's not, again, to create that fear, it's to educate them so they can understand and kind of extrapolate and go, if a customer did that, we would lose 20% of our revenue for 1 year. That's bad. Okay, if I spend 5% of my revenue fixing this, I still get 15. I can do that. So sometimes it's a numbers game you have to educate them with.
Nothing like showing them a SQL injection vulnerability and dropping a table on the screen and being like, we release this, and this is what your customers can do, and you'll get owned, right? And your customers will not be happy. Like I've done that a few times before. So.
Okay, so Sorjeen has concluded a very interesting question. She said that, can we conclude that there is no one best tool, application security tool?
Yes.
That's a conclusion.
Concluded. It really goes back to the first slide, right? So it's really dependent on, one of the things that I have found is it really is dependent on your environment, right? So when I was working I worked at a company called Nielsen in the past, and they're a big international ratings company, right? And so we had done several M&As. We've been around a long time. So our languages went all the way from C for the hardware meters that we had. We had mobile stuff in Objective-C, and then we were developing new applications in Angular, right? So that literally spans this entire breadth of technologies. Now, we spent a lot of time talking about IaaS, but IaaS doesn't test Objective-C, right? So in that environment, right, you're really going to have to go, okay, which tools on the market can test Objective-C and Angular? You may end, I'll be honest, and David may have a different opinion on this, you may end up with different tools. I'll tell you that I had 2 tools that I had to use. Like I had to use a static for some of the things that weren't covered by IAS, like Objective-C and things like that. And then I had contrast, I had my IAS for the newer languages, right? There's really no one tool that fits all. It really is dependent on, you know, which languages you need to support, which integrations you need. Some may have better integration with Eclipse or something like that, right? So it really does depend on what your requirements are.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you know, using tools like Now Secure for mobile scanning is, I mean, that's a great tool that looks at Objective-C or Java for Android, and it gives you phenomenal input on what's going on in a very short time frame. And again, you can do it on-prem or you can do it cloud-based and managed. There's lots of different ways to do these tools. But again, it depends on how much money you have. Where do you go if you have limited dollars and you get one tool? And so SAS, DAST, and IAS will likely always be part of our environment at some level, you know, depending on what Tim said earlier. Does this tool cover everything that I need? If it doesn't, you have to have another tool that covers that. So that just, yeah, no one thing.
Yep.
Okay, so one more question. What strategy would you suggest in developing a security product? What should it mostly focus on that may have a good scope in future?
By security product, you mean a product that has security, or a product that focuses on security gaps and solving those, like, you know, SolarWinds or something like that? Did I say that again? If you're a security,
I think security product.
okay, if you have a product that you're building for security, I mean, obviously you have to have great security processes in place. You know, and there's more. Obviously, we're just talking about the most recent problem, but there are so many times where, you know, if you want someone to rely on you, you have to be world class. You have to have the strategy that ensures that you are following every world class process to you know, rotate your password, good intelligent passwords, nothing in the clear, always store your data encrypted, all these things. If you don't do that and you get popped, your business is gone, right? So I think, you know, security is not optional anymore for any product. If you're a security program, it's obviously they have to have it, but any product you develop, security is a required feature by customers. There's no customer in the right mind that's going to go and say, I'm going to use you because you have the best UI. They're going to ask you, what do you do about PCI DSS? What do you do, you know, if they're the government? What do you do with FedRAMP? You know, what do you do about all these? They're going to make sure that you are adhering to the bottom line. So remember, compliance is the bottom line. It's not what you should be doing for world class. The intelligent customers, the ones that have more knowledge, are going to ask you, let me see your pen test reports. Let me see what your scans look like. Let me see what your vulnerability management program looks like. They're going to be ramping this up, and you're going to find out within a couple of years, no one's going to be able to sell product unless they can prove that they are at a certain world-class level, heads and shoulders above the bottom bar where compliance hits.
Yeah, that's why you see so many people like we have a trust site, right, in my current company, right? Like that's the whole thing, is we want to build trust. You know, we're not a security product. We are a SaaS product where, you know, I currently work, but like we have a trust site. We spend a lot of money on compliance every year, right? And so anybody who needs to get ISO or SOC or anything like that, like you're not going to get it if you don't have adequate security. That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
So just taking the last question for the day, what is your recommendation using AI, ML models for tracking the security issues that emerge or persist in the program code created by the development team?
Well, machine
learning. Nancy, go ahead.
No, as I said, machine learning and AI, those are built into a lot of the tools now. Contrast Security is developing machine learning and AI capabilities in their tool. A lot of the DAST products now have AI capabilities. Rapid7 has a DAST tool that that is beginning to develop in that arena. So a lot of them are doing that. Go ahead, Tim. I'm sorry, I kind of tromped on you there.
No, you're fine. I think that I don't think you have to do it from the reporting perspective. I think that the biggest challenge from a reporting perspective is just aggregating all of your results together, right? And finding one place to put your DAS and your IAS and your OSS like that. I don't think that requires any sort of machine learning